The plea that echoed through space. The galaxy was vast, stretching endlessly into the unknown. Most of the planets and stars were peaceful, but on the outer edge of known space, there was a human colony struggling for survival. This colony, known as New Dawn, was isolated from the rest of the universe. They had built their homes on a barren, rocky world, surrounded by thick storms and dangerous wildlife. Life was hard, but they had made it work. However, their peaceful existence was about to come to an end. One fateful day, New Dawn's communication station picked up an unusual signal. The system had been quiet for months, and the sudden burst of activity caught the attention of the entire colony. At first, they thought it was just another technical glitch or a passing ship's transmission. But this signal was different. It was a distress signal, the kind of call no one ever hoped to hear. A human voice echoed across the empty space. "Please, help. We're under attack. The creatures. We can't hold them off. We're going to die unless anyone hears this." The message repeated over and over, each time with more desperation. The voice on the other end was frantic, clearly in panic. The people of New Dawn gathered around their communication screens, eyes wide with fear. Who was this? What was happening to them? They had never heard of any other human colonies out there, especially not this close to the dangerous region of space known as the Deathworlds. The signal wasn't coming from a fellow human colony. It was coming from a distant outpost, one that had been forgotten by most, left in the dark reaches of space. The message was coming from a small group of explorers who had been sent to map new worlds and find potential places for colonization. They had unknowingly wandered too close to the edge of a death world, a place where only the most brutal and deadly creatures in the galaxy lived. These creatures were not like the ones humans had ever encountered. They were vicious, fast, and almost impossible to defeat. They were known for attacking and annihilating anything that crossed their path. The plea for help was sent to everyone within range. It reached the ears of the most unexpected group, an empire of Deathworlders. These beings were known as some of the fiercest and most powerful species in the galaxy. Their very names struck fear into the hearts of all who heard it. No one dared challenge them. The Deathworlders were legendary, their warriors unmatched in strength, and their ships were like living weapons, able to devastate entire fleets with a single blow. The humans of New Dawn had heard rumors of these Deathworlders, but they were myths to them. Tales passed around the fire at night to keep children in bed. To imagine that these beings, the very force that kept the galaxy in fear, would somehow be involved in their fate was unthinkable. But now, this was no longer a fantasy. The humans' lives depended on a single hope: the Deathworlders. The distress signal was sent into deep space, reaching anyone who might be able to hear it. The people of New Dawn didn't know if the Deathworlders would answer, or if anyone would come to their aid. They could only wait, trapped on a planet they could no longer defend. The leader of New Dawn, Commander Elise Hart, sat in front of the communication console, eyes wide with disbelief. She had seen many things in her years of service, but nothing like this. The creatures attacking their colony were not like anything they had prepared for. They were too fast, too strong. Their weapons were primitive, but their strength was overwhelming. The colony's defenses, built to withstand environmental storms and the occasional wildlife attack, were no match for these creatures. "Commander, what do we do?" a voice behind her asked. It was Captain Gregor, her second in command. He was a tall man, his face weathered by years of command, but his voice now carried an uncertainty that she had never heard before. Elise took a deep breath. She had always believed in the strength of humanity, that no matter how tough the situation, they could find a way out. But now, that belief was being tested to its breaking point. "We send out a call," she said firmly. "We send it to everyone. Maybe there's someone out there who can help us." The decision was made. The humans of New Dawn would send out a plea for help, hoping beyond hope that someone would hear it. Elise stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keys. The communication network was outdated, and the colony didn't have the resources to send a signal far beyond their system, but they had no other choice. They had to try. Her hands trembled as she typed the message. "This is Commander Elise Hart of the New Dawn colony. We are under attack by unknown hostile forces. We are requesting immediate assistance. Our defenses are failing, and we cannot hold out much longer. Please, if anyone can hear this, send help." The message was sent into the void of space, traveling through the darkness, to places no one on New Dawn had ever imagined. Back in the heart of the galaxy, far from the edge of space where the Deathworlders resided, the call was heard. An empire, vast and untouchable, picked up the message. And it was there, in the darkest corners of the galaxy, that the fate of New Dawn would be decided. Would the Deathworlders come to their aid, or would they ignore the plea and leave humanity to fend for itself? The answer, no one knew. But one thing was certain. New Dawn's survival now rested in the hands of beings more dangerous than anything they had ever known. The Deathworlders' reluctance. The galaxy, vast and cold, held secrets in every corner. Some were wonders, while others were horrors. Among these dark and hidden corners lay the Deathworlders, creatures that made even the bravest tremble in fear. These beings, each from a different planet, shared one common trait: their strength, their ferocity, and their ruthless approach to survival. They were born on worlds where life was a constant battle for existence, and they had evolved into the most dangerous predators in the universe. In the heart of their empire, in a colossal ship that could dwarf entire fleets, the leaders of the Deathworlders gathered to discuss the plea from New Dawn. The message had been received and replayed countless times, echoing across their council chambers, stirring debate among the leaders. Some of them wanted to ignore the plea, seeing it as a waste of time. After all, the humans of New Dawn were not their problem. But others saw it differently. They saw the plea as an opportunity to assert their dominance, to remind the galaxy why they were feared. Why should we help these fragile creatures? General Thrak of the Core Call, a massive reptilian being with scales as hard as metal, snarled, "We owe them nothing." The room fell silent as the other leaders turned to him. General Thrak's species was known for their brutal efficiency in war, and his voice carried weight. His people had once been defeated in a great war, and they had learned to trust only themselves. They saw the humans as weak, unworthy of their attention. "We have never involved ourselves in the petty squabbles of lesser species," said Lord Varix, a towering figure made of blackened stone, his eyes glowing like embers. He spoke with authority, the weight of centuries of war behind his words. "The humans are not worth our time." But not everyone agreed. Across the table, a quieter voice spoke up. It was Commander Xera of the Shanaru, an intelligent and calculating species known for their vast intellect and ability to manipulate both technology and diplomacy. She was a figure of calm amidst the chaos, her eyes sharp and calculating as she looked over the message. "Perhaps it's not about them," she said slowly, her voice soft yet commanding. "Perhaps it's about what they represent." Her words lingered in the room, causing the others to pause. Xera's species had long been seen as peacekeepers and strategists, though their reputation was built on their ability to manipulate any situation to their advantage. The humans, they are a young species, but their courage and adaptability are undeniable. They could be useful. We could see how strong they really are, test them, push them to their limits. If they survive, they might prove themselves worthy of a place in the galaxy. There was a long silence as the room weighed her words. The other Deathworlders knew that such a proposal was rare. It wasn't often that one of their kind suggested testing a species rather than simply annihilating them. But Commander Xera's logic made sense. If the humans could survive the trial, they might earn a measure of respect, and perhaps even become allies in the future. But if they failed, well, that would prove they were not worthy of saving. General Thrak let out a low hiss. "You would risk the lives of our people on this. We could crush them easily." "We will not crush them," Xera responded sharply, her eyes narrowing. "We will challenge them. See what they are truly made of. It will be their test, and our reward will be knowing whether they are worth our time." The other leaders murmured in agreement, though some were still uncertain. In the end, it was clear that Xira's plan would be put into motion. The Deathworlders would send their most dangerous fleets to New Dawn, not to destroy, but to test. The humans would be given a chance, but only if they could prove they were worthy. If they could hold their ground against the Deathworlders' might, they would earn their place in the galaxy. Commander Xira, satisfied with the decision, nodded toward the communication officer. "Prepare the fleets. We will begin the test." The message was sent. Massive, deadly fleets, the likes of which had never been seen before, began their journey toward New Dawn. These fleets were not made of ordinary ships. They were crafted from the strongest materials, with weapons capable of wiping out entire planets. They were living creatures whose very presence caused the fabric of space to tremble. The humans would face their trials, and their fate would be decided in the next few days. As the ships began to move, a sense of unease hung over the leaders of the Deathworlders. They had made their decision. They would test the humans, but part of them knew that this was no simple task. Even if the humans survived, they would never be the same again. Back on New Dawn, the humans had no idea what was coming. They had sent their plea for help, hoping for any kind of assistance. But now, they would face something far greater than they could ever have imagined. The Deathworlders were coming, and they were not coming to rescue them. They were coming to see if the humans were worthy of survival. The unexpected turn. As the massive fleets of the Deathworlders made their way toward New Dawn, a strange quiet settled over the human colony. The inhabitants, unaware of the terrifying test that awaited them, continued to prepare for the worst. The creatures attacking them had pushed them to their limits, and they thought the worst had already arrived. But nothing could have prepared them for what was about to unfold. Back in the heart of the Deathworlders' empire, a quiet, unexpected voice interrupted the council meeting. It was not one of the commanding leaders, nor one of the generals renowned for their brutality. It was the voice of Commander Rylan of the Vornan species, a being known for his keen tactical mind and unorthodox thinking. "Is this really the right path?" he asked, his voice cutting through the heavy silence of the room. The others turned to look at him, surprised. Commander Rylan was a respected leader, but he was not known for challenging decisions that had already been made. He was a strategist, not a rebel. But today, he could not sit idly by as the Deathworlders prepared to execute their brutal plan. "We speak of testing these humans, but what if there's more to them than we think?" he continued. "What if they're not like the others we've crushed in the past? What if we are missing something important? Maybe we should consider a different approach." His words echoed around the chamber, and for the first time, doubt crept into the minds of the other leaders. Ryland's suggestion was risky, but it was grounded in logic. He wasn't advocating for mercy. He was suggesting something more strategic. What if testing the humans' limits wasn't the answer? What if it was better to understand their true potential first? Ryland believed there might be something extraordinary about these humans, something worth exploring before making a final judgment. "We've always seen humanity as weak and frail," Ryland said, his voice gaining confidence. "But we know they have survived on their own for centuries. They have faced many dangers, and yet they are still here. Perhaps the very fact that they survived makes them worthy of a different kind of test. What if we take a step back and observe them? Watch how they respond to this threat, and then decide whether they are worth helping." The council leaders exchanged looks, some intrigued by Ryland's words, while others remained skeptical. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. For the first time, the Deathworlders' leaders considered that maybe there was more to these humans than brute strength or mindless war. For Commander Xira, however, the idea of observing the humans instead of immediately testing them felt like an unnecessary delay. She was the strategist, the one who had designed the challenge. "You would have us wait and observe," she scoffed, her deep voice laced with frustration. "These humans are not our equals. We do not need to waste time watching them. We will test them immediately. But Ryland's argument was hard to ignore. The Deathworlders had conquered and tested countless civilizations, but none had been quite like the humans. Despite their primitive technology, the humans had a spirit that could not be easily broken. Ryland had seen it in their fight for survival, in their persistence, and he was beginning to believe that humanity might be more than just another species to test and conquer. After much debate, the leaders decided to take a different approach. They would not attack New Dawn right away. Instead, they would send a small, unarmed scout ship to the colony, a ship that was far more advanced than any human technology. The ship's purpose would not be to destroy, but to observe the humans, to learn about their resourcefulness, their adaptability, and perhaps their hidden strength. Commander Xera agreed reluctantly, though she was still unconvinced by Ryland's reasoning. She wanted to move forward with the brutal test, but she also understood the value of caution. The scout ship would be a way to gather information without committing to an all-out assault. Meanwhile, on New Dawn, the humans were still oblivious to the sudden change in their fate. Commander Elise Hart and her team worked tirelessly to repair the colony's defenses, even as the creatures outside grew bolder. The colony was in a state of panic, and the threat of annihilation loomed closer with each passing day. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, there was a flicker of hope. The plea for help had been sent, and there was a chance, just a chance, that someone or something might come to their rescue. One evening, as Elise was reviewing the colony's defense plans, a faint signal reached their communication console. At first, they thought it was just static, or perhaps a malfunction. But when they filtered out the noise, they realized it was a message. It was not from a friendly ship, nor was it a distress signal. The message was simply a series of coordinates, an unspoken invitation, or perhaps a warning. Elise's heart raced as she examined the message. The coordinates were located far outside their normal range of contact, near the border of the Deathworlds. She felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that if the Deathworlders were involved, nothing would be simple. She turned to her officers, and without speaking, they all knew what the message meant. The Deathworlders were coming, but something was different this time. They weren't coming with weapons drawn. They were coming with something far more dangerous: their curiosity. The test was about to begin. The deadliest fleets are mobilized. As the Deathworlders' leaders debated and shifted their strategy, their decision was made. The small scout ship would be sent to New Dawn to observe the humans, but the true threat was already moving. In the shadow of the scout ship's journey, the true fleets of the Deathworlders were being mobilized, ready to descend upon the human colony at a moment's notice. They were massive, formidable, and terrifying beyond imagination. Their weapons were like nothing the humans had ever seen, capable of turning entire cities to rubble in seconds. Commander Xera had not abandoned her plan to test the humans. The fleets would arrive soon, but not with the immediate intention of crushing them. No, this time the Deathworlders were playing a longer game. The fleets would hover just out of reach, in the depths of space, waiting for their moment to strike. But they would first observe, watch how the humans responded to the threat, to the unknown ships lurking in the distance. On New Dawn, the humans were working tirelessly to defend themselves. With the creatures of the planet growing bolder and more aggressive, Commander Elise Hart and her team were facing a new challenge. They had no idea what was coming from beyond their skies. The distress call had been sent out, and though they hoped for help, they weren't sure whether anyone would hear it, let alone respond. But the sudden appearance of a faint signal, an unknown message with coordinates that led them to the Deathworlds, only confirmed their worst fears. The unknown fleet was not just a rescue mission. It was a test, and it was coming toward them. Elise stood in front of the colony's communications center, staring at the blinking screen. The coordinates displayed were too close to the borders of the Deathworlds to ignore. She could feel the weight of the decision ahead. The death of her people was no longer a matter of if but when. But what could they do? Their defenses were weak, their weapons were primitive, and they had no way of knowing what kind of ships the Deathworlders might bring. The clock was ticking. As she turned to the tactical officer beside her, she spoke quietly. "Prepare for the worst. If we're going to survive, we have to assume that no help is coming. We need to focus on our defense systems and fortify our positions." The officer nodded solemnly, but there was little they could do with the resources they had. The colony had been built to survive harsh environments and native wildlife, but it was not equipped for an alien fleet of Deathworlders. The walls of New Dawn's small outpost were sturdy enough to protect against storms, but would they hold against weapons that could shatter mountains? Back in the Deathworlders' empire, the fleets were ready. One by one, colossal ships were launched into space. Each was a unique marvel of destruction, a perfect blend of technology and brutality. The ships were alive in their own way, their metal hulls pulsating with the energy of the universe. These ships were built to survive and conquer, to destroy everything in their path. There was no force in the galaxy that could stand against them. The Deathworlders had no intention of immediately engaging with the humans. Their strategy was simple: test the humans' resolve. They would first give them a taste of the power they commanded. The fleets would arrive at the edge of New Dawn's atmosphere, just within range of their weapons, but not close enough to attack. They would watch, wait, and let the humans feel the fear of knowing that they were surrounded by ships that could obliterate them in a heartbeat. The humans' survival instincts would be tested like never before. And then the test would begin. The lead ship, a massive war machine known as the Fang of the Call, glided through the blackness of space, its engines silent and its weapons dormant. The ship was surrounded by a dozen other vessels, each one more intimidating than the last. These ships were not just tools of war. They were symbols of the Deathworlders' might, and they were positioned perfectly to ensure that New Dawn would feel the full weight of their presence. Back on New Dawn, Elise and her officers had no idea of the true scale of what was coming. They had been monitoring the skies for any sign of activity, but the shadowy fleet remained just out of view. The only indication they had was the sudden drop in temperature, the strange electromagnetic pulses that disrupted their communications, and the eerie silence that hung over the colony. It was as if the entire universe had paused, waiting for something to happen. Elise paced back and forth, her mind racing. She knew they were running out of time, but there was little more they could do to prepare. The colony was doing everything it could to hold the line against the creatures on the ground, but the looming threat from the skies was something far more dangerous. The Deathworlders had arrived, and the question was no longer about surviving the creatures. It was about surviving the test that was about to come from the stars. As the Deathworlder fleet approached, they remained unseen, but their presence was impossible to ignore. The temperature continued to drop, and the colony's sensors began to pick up strange energy signatures. The air was thick with tension, and the people of New Dawn knew something was coming, something terrible and incomprehensible. They just didn't know how to prepare for it. Commander Xira, watching from the comfort of her command center on the Fang of the Call, observed the humans through the sensors on her ship. She saw their reaction, their fear, and she felt a strange satisfaction. The test had begun. The humans would now have to decide whether they would fight, flee, or crumble under the weight of the Deathworlders' power. But even Xira could not predict what would happen next. The humans were not acting in the way she had anticipated. They were not running. They were not giving up. Instead, they were preparing, fortifying their colony, gathering their forces, and bracing for whatever the Deathworlders had in store. The test was only just beginning, and the outcome was still uncertain. As the Deathworlders' fleets watched from the shadows, the humans' fate hung in the balance. The arrival of the fleets. The first sign of the Deathworlders' arrival came in the form of a deep rumble that shook the ground beneath New Dawn's feet. The ground didn't just tremble. It seemed to pulse, as if the very planet itself was holding its breath. The sky above, usually clear and calm, began to darken with an unnatural stillness. For a moment, There was no sound, no movement, just the eerie calm before the storm. Commander Elise Hart stood in front of the colony's largest monitor, staring at the sky through the thin layer of atmospheric shields. She could see nothing. No ships, no fleets, no enemies, but she felt the weight of their presence. There was something out there, something far beyond their ability to fight. The temperature dropped further, and the air felt heavier, thick with tension. Elise's gut twisted in anticipation, but she held her ground. Her people had fought many battles, but this was different. This was not just a fight for survival. It was a test of everything they had ever known. "Commander, we've lost all communication with the outside world," said her communications officer, his voice tight with anxiety. "Something's blocking our signals." Elise nodded, already expecting this. "It's the Deathworlders," she muttered under her breath. "They're playing their game, and they want us to know it." From the shadows of space, the massive fleets of the Deathworlders began to emerge. First, a few faint shapes in the sky, but as the minutes passed, the ships became more and more visible, growing larger and more terrifying as they neared the colony. Each one was a behemoth in its own right, hulking, war-torn vessels that looked as though they could swallow entire planets. These were not just ships. They were living, breathing machines of war, each one a testament to the raw power of the Deathworlders' empire. The lead ship, the Fang of the Call, was the largest of them all, a colossal beast that seemed to consume the very light around it. Its dark metallic hull gleamed with an otherworldly sheen, and from its sides, enormous weapons hung like the teeth of a predator waiting to strike. The ship was surrounded by a dozen smaller but equally intimidating vessels, each one a weapon of mass destruction in its own right. As the fleets neared New Dawn, their sheer size cast an imposing shadow over the colony. The humans, having only ever encountered primitive threats on their world, could scarcely comprehend the scale of the force bearing down upon them. These ships were unlike anything they had ever seen, each one capable of wiping out the entire colony in seconds. They were surrounded, trapped in the grip of something they couldn't hope to defeat. Inside the command center of the Fang of the Call, Commander Xera observed the humans' movements through her ship's sensors. She could see their reaction: fear, confusion, and then, strangely, defiance. The humans had not run. They had not surrendered. They were preparing for something. "Interesting," Xera muttered to herself, her sharp eyes tracking the movements of the humans. "They're not breaking. Not yet, anyway." Her cold gaze flickered over to the tactical officer beside her. "Are the weapons ready?" she asked. "Ready to fire at a moment's notice, Commander," the officer replied. "But we are not to engage unless given orders. This is a test, not a battle." Xera nodded, though part of her wanted to test the humans' resolve. She had seen countless species crumble at the mere sight of the Deathworlders' fleets, and part of her wanted to crush them, to prove once and for all that humanity was not worthy of their help. But Commander Ryland's words still echoed in her mind. What if they are more than we think? And so, she held her fire, waiting for the humans to show their true colors. On the ground, Elise and her officers were busy preparing the colony's final defenses. There was no chance of winning a battle against these ships, but they could fight for survival. They could show the Deathworlders that they were not weak, that they had the heart of survivors. The humans of New Dawn might not have the weapons to stand against the Deathworlders, but they had something more important: courage, unity, and a refusal to give up. Elise glanced at her team. "Hold your positions," she said firmly. "Do not fire unless we are attacked. We need to show them we're capable of defending ourselves, but we won't make the first move." The ground around New Dawn was littered with makeshift barricades, improvised defenses, and every available weapon the humans had managed to scrounge together. Their defenses weren't nearly enough to stop the Deathworlders' ships, but they hoped they could slow them down, buy time, and give the humans a fighting chance. The fleets hovered just out of range, their weapons primed, but they did not strike. Instead, they waited, A sense of eerie silence filled the air as the human defenders stood, staring at the massive ships above them. They could feel the weight of the moment, the realization that their survival was no longer in their hands. As the first of the smaller ships in the fleet began to circle the perimeter, the humans braced themselves. What came next would define whether they would be allowed to continue living, or whether the Deathworlders would wipe them out without a second thought. The test had begun, and the humans had no idea what to expect. The fleets had arrived, but they had not come to save them. They had come to see if they were worthy of survival. In the cold void of space, the Deathworlders watched, their eyes fixed on the small colony beneath them. The test was far from over, and the fate of New Dawn hung by a thread. The fight for survival. The ships hovered ominously above New Dawn, casting dark shadows over the barren landscape. The sheer size of the Deathworlders' fleets created an atmosphere thick with dread. Every human on the colony, from the youngest children to the hardened workers, could feel the weight of the moment. The air felt heavy, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. Commander Elise Hart stood on the edge of the command center, her eyes fixed on the monitors displaying the movements of the Deathworlder ships. They had not yet attacked, but the looming threat was unmistakable. She turned to her team, her face steely with determination. "Get ready," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "We hold the line. Whatever happens, we don't back down. We're humans, and we've survived worse." The defenders had been trained for many things: harsh environments, dangerous wildlife, even the occasional hostile encounter with other humans. But never had they been up against a force like the Deathworlders. The weapons of the colony, crude as they were compared to what hovered in the sky, were their only hope. Every human on New Dawn had been trained to fight for survival, and now that instinct would be their greatest weapon. The Deathworlders' fleets remained silent, the immense ships floating in the blackness of space. Their weapons were powered and ready to strike, but the Deathworlders seemed content to watch. For now, their eyes were fixed on the humans below, waiting for them to make the first move, waiting to see what they would do in the face of such overwhelming power. Inside the command center, Elise issued the orders. "Prepare for the worst, but don't fire unless they do. If they want to fight, we'll give them one. If they want to test us, then let's show them what we're made of." The humans, armed with their makeshift weapons, stood ready. They had been training for days, preparing to defend their homes, but deep down, they all knew the truth. No matter how hard they fought, no matter how much they resisted, they were outmatched. Yet that thought did not falter their resolve. The humans of New Dawn had one thing that the Deathworlders could not measure: a fierce will to survive. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the ground. The first of the Deathworlders' ships fired, sending a shockwave that rattled the entire colony. It was a warning shot, a clear signal that the test had begun. The ground shook violently, and dust and debris filled the air as the first wave of attacks began. The humans had barely time to react, but they scrambled to their positions, firing back with everything they had. The weapons were crude compared to the advanced technology of the Deathworlders, but they were all the humans had. The enemy ships, massive and terrifying, didn't seem to even flinch at the puny attempts to fight back. The explosions caused by the humans' attacks were small in comparison to the cataclysmic power of the Deathworlders' weapons, but they were enough to send a message. The humans were not going down without a fight. Elise barked orders, directing her people to hold their positions. "Focus fire on the smaller ships. We need to take down as many as we can before they retaliate. Hold your ground." But as the battle raged on, it became clear that the humans were fighting an uphill battle. The Deathworlders' ships were too powerful, their weapons too advanced. The human defenses held for a brief moment, but it was only a matter of time before the sheer force of the Deathworlders overwhelmed them. Still, the humans held on, refusing to give in. Commander Xira, observing from the fang of the core call, watched as the humans fought back with everything they had. Their persistence was admirable, but it wasn't enough. From her position, She could see the human colony beginning to crumble under the assault. The Deathworlders were not yet engaging their full power, but the human defenses were no match for the onslaught. "Impressive," Zira muttered under her breath. "They're not giving up. Not yet." At the same time, Commander Ryland stood beside her, a more cautious figure. He had watched the humans closely, observing their tactics and behavior. They were fighting with an intensity that he had not expected. He had thought them weak, fragile creatures, but they were proving him wrong. He couldn't help but feel a grudging respect for them. "They may survive this," Ryland said softly. "They have strength. They have something most species don't. Willpower. They don't know when to quit." Zira didn't reply immediately. She was deep in thought, her mind weighing the implications of what she had seen. The test was not just about force, it was about resilience, and the humans had shown something that made her pause. Perhaps they were not the weaklings she had assumed them to be. On the ground, Elise and her team continued to hold the line. The Deathworlders' bombardments were relentless, but the humans fought back with every ounce of their strength. Each strike was met with resistance. Each step forward was hard-won. But they didn't retreat. They couldn't afford to. Not with their survival on the line. As the battle stretched on, the humans began to realize something. They were not fighting for victory. They were fighting for respect. They were showing the Deathworlders that humanity was not to be dismissed as weak. No matter the odds, they would not back down. And then, in the midst of the chaos, something unexpected happened. The Deathworlders paused. The relentless assault slowed, and the ships above New Dawn fell silent for a moment, as if they were waiting for something. Was it a retreat, or was the test far from over? The humans, exhausted and battered, paused too. They had been fighting for so long, they weren't sure what had happened. But they knew one thing. The Deathworlders were not finished with them yet. The fight for survival had only just begun. The final decision. The air was thick with tension as the battle between the humans and the Deathworlders reached its peak. The skies above New Dawn were filled with the sounds of explosions and the flash of weapons fire. But there was something different now. Something that had shifted the balance of the confrontation. The Deathworlders, after watching the humans fight tooth and nail, had pulled back their forces, not out of mercy, but because something had changed in their perspective. On the fang of the core call, Commander Xera stood silently, observing the chaos below. The ships had paused, weapons powered down, and for a moment, the destruction halted. The humans, bruised and battered, still fought valiantly. They had not surrendered. They had not broken. Even when it seemed like there was no hope, they'd fought with everything they had. Zira felt a strange unease gnawing at her, an unfamiliar respect for the humans. Commander Ryland, standing beside her, watched with a quiet intensity. He had been right. These humans were not like the other species the Deathworlders had tested. They were resilient, resourceful, and far stronger than anyone had predicted. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of admiration in it. "They've earned it, haven't they?" Xera didn't respond immediately, her mind racing as she considered the implications. The humans had withstood the test. Against all odds, they had not only survived, they had earned the respect of the Deathworlders, something few other species had ever done. She had planned to watch them crumble under the pressure, to watch them beg for mercy. Instead, she had witnessed their strength, their unity, and their refusal to back down. "They've earned something, that's for sure," Xera said softly, her voice betraying a rare emotion. "But do they deserve more than just survival?" The decision was not an easy one. The Deathworlders were a proud, powerful empire, and they had never given mercy to those they deemed unworthy. But these humans were different. They had fought for their place in the galaxy, and they had done so with an unwavering spirit. For the first time in Xera's long career, she found herself questioning what truly made a species worthy. Back on New Dawn, Commander Elise Hart stood among her people, her heart heavy with exhaustion. They had fought long and hard, But the truth was, they had nothing left to give. The colony had held out, but it was clear that their resources were nearly depleted. The creatures on the ground had pushed them to their limits, and now the Deathworlders had pushed them even further. Yet they had not broken. Elise had seen the strength in her people, the courage that shone through in the face of impossible odds. They had proved that they were not just survivors, they were warriors. Then, as the dust settled, a strange signal began to broadcast from the sky. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an attack. It was a message, and it came from the Deathworlders. Humanity, a deep voice echoed from the ships above, resonating through the speakers in the colony. It was Commander Xera's voice, though it was filtered through the systems of the massive fleet. You have passed the test. You have shown us your strength. You have shown us what it means to fight for survival, and you have earned our respect. The words sent a ripple of shock through the humans below. Elise's breath caught in her throat. They had expected annihilation. They had expected a final, brutal strike from the Deathworlders. But instead they had been tested, and now they had been acknowledged. We will not destroy you, the voice continued. Instead, we will leave you in peace. You have proven yourselves worthy. The Deathworlders do not give mercy easily, but you have earned your place in the galaxy. We will depart, and we will watch. The message ended, and for a moment, the humans stood in stunned silence, unsure of what had just happened. The ships in the sky began to pull away, their massive forms fading into the depths of space. The humans were left standing, watching as the Deathworlders' fleets disappeared into the distance. Elise didn't know what to say. She looked at her people, and for the first time since the battle began, she saw a glimmer of hope in their eyes. They had done it. They had survived, not by defeating their enemies with brute force, but by proving that they were more than capable of standing their ground. The Deathworlders had come as an overwhelming force, expecting to crush the humans beneath their might. But they had left with something different. They had left with respect for a species that would not yield, a species that had fought not for power, but for the right to exist. We did it, Elise whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. We did it. As the colony began to regroup and rebuild, the humans knew that their place in the galaxy had been secured, not through destruction, but through determination. The Deathworlders had left them in peace, but the humans now understood that their survival was only the beginning. They had passed the test, but the galaxy was vast, and the challenges ahead would be even greater. The final decision had been made. The humans were worthy, and they would stand strong in the face of whatever came next.